How's everybody doing tonight? Or today? Or whenever you happen to listen to this? My name is Joe. And my partner, co-host, his name is Al. And he is still not back yet. Al is doing a big move. So I guess he's stored up enough shit over the years so that he's got to spend a lot of time moving. If you listen to the first solo show that I did, it was pretty terrible, and this one probably will go the same way. But one of the things that's interesting about doing something for the first time is that it scares the shit out of you. It's scaring the shit out of me. It's not in my comfort zone. And but I think, like anything, if you do it enough, you'll get somewhat good at it. Not that I really want to do this that many times, because my thing is where we talk about so many abstract things that have no real, defined answer. It's always good to have somebody to bounce things off of. So that being said, I thought of a topic, and of course, we don't spend a lot of time talking about stuff that's easy here. We often touch on all the things you're not supposed to talk about during the holidays, like race, religion, politics, things like that, because they tend to be hot button issues, and everybody's got an opinion, and those opinions clash, and oftentimes things go off the rails. At any rate, I'm going to get started, and I'm going to talk about race a little bit. And I'm just going to give my perspective on race and how I form my opinion on race, and try to kind of maybe lay out a coherent narrative that you can understand. And if you don't understand it, then I've done a shitty job, because I'm going to try to speak in plain English. And not agreeing isn't the same as not understanding. But at any rate, here it goes. So, and when I mean race, I'm going to talk about African Americans in the United States. We're not going to get into, whether Mexicans or... And what I want to do is try to talk about my experiences and experience of others that I've come into contact with. So, to get started, I'd just like to say that I was brought up by two people that might as well be hippies, and there was no racism in our household. Everybody was seen the same. Or seen as the same. Everybody was equal. That was pretty much ingrained into all of us kids when we were growing up. And we moved when I was 7 years old. We moved to a brand new neighborhood, and this neighborhood was a neighborhood which a lot of people were moving into who had lived in the Boston area, more precisely the South Boston, Dorchester area of Boston. And this was in the 70s when busing, if you're familiar with that, if you're old enough to remember, there was a great deal of busing going on, where they would bus, because everything was segregated then, even up here in the People's Republic of Massachusetts, it was segregated. And we had, what they did is they started busing, black kids into white neighborhoods and white schools, and white kids into, black neighborhoods and black schools. And most of a lot of the white people who had options would have nothing to do with that. And they moved away and brought their kids. They either put them into a private school or they moved away. And I have to say, some of the people that I grew up around were some of the most racist, And I don't use the term racist. Let me talk about racist. I don't use the term racist lightly, and I believe it gets thrown around way too easy. I think a true racist is somebody that hates someone of a different, whether it be skin color or ethnicity, who there's actual visceral hate in their heart for whatever nationality or skin color or ethnicity this a person might be. And you really, I think, in order to be a true racist, you really have to have that hate. And man, I met a lot of people that had that hate. And what was interesting to me, never having grown up around any black people, I didn't know a black person. And as a matter of fact, to this day, I don't really have any black friends. I've met black people along the way. Never had a bad experience. I had a brother-in-law that was he was Cape Verdean, I believe, and but I would guess you would call him black, and he was a nice guy, hardworking guy, and my sister has 3 beautiful children with him, and they got divorced, but that's neither here nor there. It's but my experience with black folks is fairly limited. But in an anthropological sense, I look at the disadvantages of the African American experience is one that's it's pretty unique. It may not be unique within the world, but it's certainly a unique experience in the sense that if you have a background, if you have an ethnic background, if you're Irish or you're Italian or you're Norwegian or you're Swedish or you're English, you typically have a culture that you can trace back through generations, and probably many generations, and you have a culture that not only gives you a way that you think, but also a way that you behave, and a way that you conduct yourself, and what you're supposed to do in a family situation. And now, it doesn't mean that all of this is good, but it means that if you picture in the African American experience being brought here, and of not free will, putting in one of these horrible slave ships, or just born into slavery, having family members just taken away and sold like they were goods, which that's the way they were treated. And I believe that, although I think that it gets better, I want to say that the having grown up, having experienced that, and let's face it, once the Civil War ended, black people were free, but they weren't really free. I mean, basically, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, I mean, that's when African American folks actually got, legislative freedom. But even today, being black, they talk about, there's a lot of white privilege talk. And I would argue against not using that, because I would rather point towards an African American having a disadvantage rather than a white person having an advantage. It may just be semantics, but it's also, I don't know, you don't want to put the majority population on their heels, so that they're saying, now, wait a minute, what privilege do I have? I mean, I grew up with nothing. I started a business by myself, and there's a lot of people that feel that way, that would be much more open to, the idea, understanding, and the idea that African-American folks had a disadvantage rather than white people being privileged. And because truly, there are a lot of white people that grew up basically with, I grew up with very little. We didn't have much, and I was able to put myself through college, and I was able to, I was on my own, and I think you see a lot of failure in the African American communities, especially in the inner cities, because of the very essence of not having an identity. They don't. You weren't brought up in a culture. You weren't brought up in a. The African American folks had to put together a new identity for themselves, coming from slavery, and I think that's a very difficult thing to do, even though there's a lot of people that see themselves, in the same light, coming here with nothing from another country. It's different. It's fundamentally different, and I think that's one of the reasons why there are problems in the inner cities. And if anybody wants to think of me as a racist because I mentioned that, then you're a fool, because all you need to do is travel to Martin Luther King Boulevard in any city in America, and you're going to find that it's usually a poorer, not as nice section of the city, wherever the city might be. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's horrible, but it means that African American inner city people have a tough time. And, there's a lot of talk that I don't really believe in, as far as, I don't think African American people are lazy. I don't think that they are different. I think one of the huge things is that there is a unique sense of lack of opportunity. And if you raise anyone, if you bring up anyone in a system where there is no opportunity, and basically no opportunity means no hope, then you're setting yourself up as a society for some real bad shit to happen. Because if you got no hope and you got nothing, nobody's going to hire you, and you've got all this negativity aimed towards you, then you're not going to be able to do very well. And more than likely, you'll end up in some sort of if your family's not whole, and you didn't have a strong, you're a young male, and you didn't have a dad around, and money was always tight, and maybe there was some problems with drugs in the family. Maybe there was some problems with just making ends meet. And you'll find many black families where the mom was working 3 jobs, so it's tough to raise kids when dad left and mom's working all the time. I mean, you're basically raising yourself, and your peers are probably doing the same thing, and you end up maybe in some sort with little to no hope. You end up in a situation where there might be some drugs going on, some violence, some stuff that we're seeing in the south side of Chicago right today, the stuff that's happening today. And there's a lot of people that think, well, these African Americans need to pick themselves up by their bootstraps. And, you can say that, but how do you do it without the opportunity? You have to have that opportunity. And I don't think there are white people that understand. And for some reason, I get it. Now, maybe I don't get it, and I'm going to get hate email and be called all kinds of awful names, or maybe I'll even be called a racist. I don't know. But what I'm saying is, unlike many, I'm not going to say all, but many ethnic people that come to this country, it's impossible to hide from being black, from being African American. I mean, you can be an Italian person and you can be pretty much a white guy. A Latino person can, pass as a white guy. You can fall into that. Caucasian or white people is a pretty big range of people that fall into that category. Whereas if you're African American, you can't hide. Not that you want to, nor should you have to. But unfortunately, if I go into a store, regardless of where it is, no one's going to follow me around thinking that I'm going to take off with shit. And I would imagine that there's a lot of African Americans, maybe I can't speak for all, but I'm going to say that I bet a majority has had a situation where they've been, just because of the color of their skin, they are looked at differently. And there is a prejudice there that even good people have a prejudice. I mean, prejudice just means you've prejudged, but you've prejudged based on what you've seen and heard, and I think you kind of create a feedback loop. So if things aren't going good in the African American community, through the complete lack of education and opportunity, then and there's bad shit going on, and there's you're the only way you can make ends meet is to steal or get a shit job at McDonald's or something, and that's the highlight. That's going to be the highlight of your life. Where the hell are you going to go without a college education, or you just extremely smart? Your high school education that you get in the inner cities is from what I've seen, and is just awful. And it's very, very tough to get out of that situation, as I've heard many of the entertainers who have lived in that type of situation. They say that, look, it's a hopeless situation, and what are you going to do? You either sell drugs, or if you're fortunate enough to have a skill, you can do some rap music, and then of course there's a large population of African Americans that do quite well. They've somehow broken the mold, and they can look back generations, and their families have done well. Maybe they probably lived up north, and are doing quite well. And you see more and more African Americans doing better and better as time goes on. I have tremendous optimism and hope that the future for African Americans in this country is going to be. We will come to a time. It might not be in my lifetime, and I don't know if it's going to be in my kid's lifetime, but there will come a time when people just don't see color. I see it I saw it in my daughter when she was younger. Just didn't really recognize, didn't matter. This is just another person, and it would be great if we could snap fingers and just get to that point, but we're not going to get there. And I certainly don't want to come across as some sort of an apologist too for the African American community. It's a very dynamic situation that the conclusion though that I come to is it is a tough thing to be in a situation where you have so little opportunity compared to the next guy, and you are discriminated against because of the color of your skin. And there's no question that happens, and it happens a lot, and it happens today. And so I think that there's a right on that side, in the African American communities, to be pretty pissed off about that. And our president, Barack Obama, or former president before the great Donald Trump with that wonderful hair, the orange hair. Before that came along, Barack Obama would talk about, I know what it's like to stand on the street and try to hail a cab and get no ride whatsoever. So, I mean, the stereotypes and the prejudice, and I'm not going to say racist. I think that there are people that genuinely are afraid that, why take a chance? These black people could be thugs from, the neighborhood and they're going to stab me and rob me, and that could be the furthest thing from the truth, but they're certainly going to be, there are people that are just afraid. And, but they're not racist. They don't have hate in their heart towards that. That's not racism. That's fear. And it's not meant to give anybody a pass, but it's a real fear. Law enforcement, I don't understand I don't know, there's just so many. Now, I'm not a big fan, and I've mentioned this several times on this show, of the Massachusetts State Police. And I think there's various police organizations, and certainly the Los Angeles Police Department, after the Rodney King beating, there was just no way that those people that beat that guy shouldn't have gone to jail. Just no way. And that police department was run by, I forget his name, but he was before Daryl Gates, who was the chief of police. And this guy was an out-and-out racist who built, basically the guy that, I think his last name might have been Powell or something, but he built the Los Angeles Police Department. And as African Americans were fleeing the South and moving towards the West, this guy was bringing white guys from the South to be Los Angeles Police Department guys. And I saw that in a documentary, and I don't have any reason to disbelieve it. There's as they say, nobody's from California. It's just everybody moves there from somewhere, which, isn't as true today, but it certainly was back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, when this gentleman was in power. And, there's no question that folks in that community have been treated like shit just because of the color of their skin. And you don't hear, and I'm my limited experience, you certainly don't hear many good things about black people intermixing with the police. It certainly doesn't seem to work out. Now, maybe some of that's warranted. I mean, it's, that Michael Brown that got shot, and there was no videotape of that. Now, I saw the video of that kid in the store, basically taunting and pushing around these Asian folks who were the owners of the store. So, I mean, this guy wasn't a good guy. And I try to keep that, my mindset that, they're in a community with, again, shitty schools, not a lot of opportunity, but nobody really knows what happened when that guy got shot. And there's nothing definitive. And but unfortunately, the police have never done themselves any favors just by their actions with African Americans. So I think there's fault. There's definitely fault when it comes to the police and the African American community. There's fault on both sides. Once again, you have a situation where you've got tremendous fear on the part of the police officers that have to go in and police communities that are in trouble. And whether it's the fault of the people that live there or not, the day-to-day reality is it's probably a pretty scary thing to do, and they don't see much good coming out of that community. And then I go back and say, well, how could it? How could you see a lot of good? Because the opportunity isn't there. And you kind of go back and forth. But the reality is, if there's a bunch of people walking around and there's I don't know, I think I read that last year there were 4,000 or 5,000 shootings in Chicago. I mean, that's in predominantly African American areas. And you're a cop, and whether you're white or black, I would imagine you would be afraid as a police officer. And that's a tough job. It's a tough job to keep the peace, and but it's not okay. It doesn't give you an excuse to just shoot black people because especially that anybody that saw that video where there was a guy that shot a motorist, and the guy was pulled over, and I don't know who cares what he had. I mean, whether the car wasn't registered. I mean, he was running away, and the guy shot him in the back. I mean, it's just unconscionable. So, I don't know. I guess it's one of those, this is a subject that's kind of that's if you've listened to this, you've kind of got my point of view. You've got where I'm coming from. I look at it as it's an American tragedy, and it really is. It's a you can't go back. You can't go back and change it. I mean, you can't fix it and make it all better. There's no quick, easy fix. I believe that it's just going to take time. And as people become more, these are just people. These are people that just they want the same thing that everybody else does. They want to be able to feed their kids. They want to be able to, have a life for themselves, take advantage of this wonderful system that we have in this country. And it really is. I mean, it's you can certainly find a lot of fault, but compared to the rest of the world, we're not so bad. But like I said earlier, it's really tough to pretend that you're not black, although you shouldn't have to. And people have a predetermined belief system already in place, depending on their experiences in the past, or experiences they've been told about from people that lived with, in and around the communities that are predominantly, populated with black folks. And I'll tell you, when I was growing up, I've never had a bad experience with a black person ever. I had plenty more with white people than with black people. And I'll tell you, the amount of hatred that I saw towards these people was just incredible. And, I can't believe that anything was that bad, and there was just the hatred, the level of hatred was frightening. I'll give you a story. I build houses now, and when I was younger, I went to South Boston to look at a job, and this was in the 70s. And I went with my dad, who did a little contracting, and he was talking to the owner. This was there was a lot of triple deckers. It was just means there's an apartment on each floor, 3 apartments total. And I went and looked through the house, and I was probably, 12, 13 years old at the time, 14. And there was just stuff painted everywhere. This horrible profanity, and kill all the, N-word this and N-word that. And just some of the nastiest, ugliest shit you'd ever want to read. And I walked out, and I said to the guy who my father was talking to, I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Somebody must have broke into your place there, and spray painted all that horrible stuff on the walls. And he goes, "Oh no, my kids were bored, so I gave them each a spray can, and they went in there. We're tearing those walls out." So this is what I'm talking about. That it's not only was this guy just hated black people, any black person. He taught his kids to hate black people, and that's a tough battle right there. It's going to be very hard to win over somebody like that, and if you teach your children to hate black people as well, I mean, how are you going to beat that other than time? I mean, you can't just. I mean, if you got hate in your heart, you can't. You're never going to fix somebody like that. I don't know. Maybe you can, but that's tough, and I think that's why, every decade we see better and better things. It doesn't excuse this far left shit where everybody's everyone's called a racist no matter. They said, "Oh, a black person fell down outside, and I think he might have been drunk," and automatically, so this guy's "Oh, well, you're stereotyping and you're a racist," and I mean that bullshit's gotta go away, because it's kind of like the white privilege thing. You know what? You can say it. There's truth to it, but it's not doing you any good. It's pissing off a lot of white people. Not myself. Because I get it. I understand it. But there's a lot of people out there that don't feel that way. So, and they would agree that black people have had a raw deal in this country. I mean, how could you argue against that? Black people were, African American people in this country were slaves. I mean, how can you say that they, started off great? They didn't just immigrate here of free will. Has anybody out there ever seen a diagram of a slave ship and how people were? I mean, it's just atrocious how human beings treated other human beings. But so that's my perspective on race, and naive, maybe. I don't know. I think as someone that's fairly optimistic, I see it as something that's getting better, and as time goes on, and it's not 5 years, it's another 50. I think there'll come a time in the United States where color just isn't seen, and I just think if we get rid of the agitators and it's a slow change. Hopefully the children that were spray painting the house with profanity and racist comments all over the place are, hopefully they're not teaching their children to hate all people of color, So, well, I think that's going to be my little half-hour show tonight, because I'm not taking any breaks, and I'm going to put this out there, and it might be shit, but, I can already feel that, and maybe the topic is horrible. People don't care or don't want to listen, but I can already feel I think it's a little better than the first show, So I've gone from, dog shit to horse shit. But listen, I hope all three of you that listen to this show on a regular basis are doing well, and I think I've got Al back here on Thursday, which is tomorrow, but tomorrow night. He usually gets he does all this editing. I had to teach myself how to put the intro in and the outro, and it's kind of fun, actually. But I enjoyed doing this show. I can't do 2 hours of it because You know, I can't look it up. I suppose I could pause and go look at something, but I don't think anybody wants to listen to me for more than half an hour. Probably 10 minutes is too much. But hope all is well with you folks, and either the two of us will be back or I might be doing another solo show. Y'all take care.